Good morning. I'm happy to be here and be able to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about our journey towards being a bit more accessibility minded as an organization. A little bit about myself. I am a Caucasian male. He and him are my pronouns. I live in the sunny desert of southern Utah. I work as a UX manager for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We have a team of about 40 designers. We have 100 plus products that we create, serving a myriad of purposes for the church. And so every day is an exciting adventure with lots of different types of challenges that we address. Academically, I'm interested in the sociology of technology design, and today's presentation is going to be informed a little bit by some of those interests. We're going to talk a little bit about organization structure and behavior, and how to use some of those ways of thinking and understanding to help on your journey towards becoming an accessibility-minded organization. As a little bit of outline, I'll provide a little bit of background, define some terms and ideas, and then spend the bulk of the time talking about the journey that I have been on with my organization over the past 5 years. After that, I'll share a few final takeaways and then have some time for questions, and I hope that we can have some good discussion to round things out. Accessibility is a journey. I'm sure all of you have heard that sentiment shared, and that is definitely true in the case of my organization. Going back about 5 years ago, I remember an interaction with one of our directors getting onto an elevator, and he was like looking very troubled, and I was like, "What can I do for you?" And he said, "Man, we got accessibility problems coming our way." And I perked up because that's something that I was personally interested in and working individually to try and shape some change. I just said, "Talk to me some more. I can help you out." So that was the beginning of a journey. As a UX manager, I'm situated in a place where I can help shape some decisions, but certainly not everything that happens in an organization. So I'm going to be talking about the journey from my perspective as a UX designer, keeping in mind that I work in a very large and very complicated organization. So let's take a moment and define a few terms. Hierarchy is something that, at least in my organization, I'm very familiar with. To define this term, it's a system of organizing based off of status and authority. In short, it's all about power structures. And for this discussion, I want to use a tree to represent hierarchy, where the trunk is the central leadership and the limbs are different divisions of the organization, and the branches are the frontline workers. I'm one of the branches. I work out on the periphery as far as this tree model is concerned. And I've got my designers that I work with, and I've got a little sphere of influence. And after that, we have silos of excellence. Lots of other people doing lots of excellent things, but not always great collaboration. Networks. Networks are things that I'm really interested in, specifically people and social networks. A network is a collection of interconnected peoples and things where there are nodes and connections that create relationships. And academically, this is the thing that I study, is the networks and relationships that allow and support and sometimes cause design to happen in the way that it does. For me, networks are fascinating. Then the third concept for today, a rhizome. A rhizome is a type of a plant structure that spreads below the ground. It has nodes that produce roots and shoots. An example might be bamboo, quaking aspen trees, scrub oak, and lots of types of grasses. One of the things that's kind of interesting about these rhizomes as a plant type is once they get established, they get everywhere and they're really hard to remove. So we hear sometimes about accessibility being a grassroots effort. Yes, that's what we're going to talk about today is our grassroots effort to create that network of nodes with roots and shoots that have taken us from not knowing how to approach accessibility to one that's at least got our feet on the ground and moving in a good positive direction. So let's talk a little bit about hierarchical behavior. In situations, organizations like my own, priorities flow from the individuals that have status and authority to the areas where that work is accomplished. We're given responsibilities and accountabilities and expected to report back based on the things that we have been asked to do. So far, I haven't had anybody in our organization directly say, accessibility is a priority and we need to make sure that we're shipping accessible technologies. Now, it's been interesting. I've had conversations where we talk about accessibility and everyone agrees that it's a good idea. Everyone agrees that it's something that we ought to be doing. But when it's put against priorities that people are being measured against versus things that we ought to or could do, I end up on the short end of those conversations often. So one of the questions that I want to try to explore with you today is this question of how do we advance accessibility when it's not a formal organizational priority? That's the journey that I've been on. So as a UX designer, I sit out in the branches of one particular limb of a really large, complicated organization. One of the activities that I was asked to do a few years ago was to start a design system. So I took that opportunity to start to bake into the approach that we take to design accessibility things. So we started with color. It's an easy one, and a thing that oftentimes it's the obvious choice amongst designers. Well, if we have good color contrast, we have accessibility. Sadly, that's not as simple as that, but it was a great place for us to start. We worked on incorporating good type strategy. We incorporated good sizing and spacing into our design system, such that all of the 40 designers that I work with, as they started to utilize that design system, started building into our products more accessible characteristics. But that alone didn't take us from the so-so accessibility that we had to outstanding accessibility. It was just a first step. Fairly quickly, we learned that the design system by itself wasn't going to meet our needs. And I started having goals that I had set up with my leadership about how we would try to make improvements on accessibility. So one of the things that we had to do was enlist the help of our engineering partners, the folks that make the components that our design system is part of. And that was a great first set of conversations because I went from a situation of, hey, I can control color, I can control type, to now having conversations about, can we build this into the code? Can we start having things that require our good ARIA labeling for icons and buttons, good alt text requirements for a successful build for a website or a web application. So that partnership allowed us to start to move much further down the road than just as a designer saying, here's what the design should look like. The next and interesting thing that happened as we started having this partnership was we started using some of the great free tools that are out there to assess where we're at and what other opportunities that we might address to help improve the accessibility of our products. Very quickly, I learned that language declaration was one of our most pervasive and common errors. I understand in a lot of organizations it's alt text. For us, it was language. And so I started making a few queries because we were using ISO 639-1. It's a 3-character language definition, which is not the standard, as most of you will know. So I started asking around, hey, what do we do to change this? That led me to another node in our organization, another person that was interested in trying to help make sure our products were available and accessible to a larger audiences. So we started having conversations about translation of content. And I learned that someone on their team had made a decision years and years ago to use this particular standard for cataloging the content. That had crept into our code base and into the way that we deliver international content. It's still something that we haven't been able to fix because that decision had such deep consequence across so many of our systems and services. Little by little, we're getting there, though. But the benefit that came out of this set of conversations that frankly were interesting, challenging, and frustrating because, good grief, we're only talking about changing from a 3-letter code to a 2-letter code. How hard can it be? In our situation, it's really hard. But I made a friend. We started having good conversations, and that introduced me to our content creation team that was just far enough removed from our content and product delivery that we didn't understand how to work together very well. But we started having these great conversations around how do we create accessible content and then make sure that there are accessible platforms to deliver that content. For me, this was a game-changing moment because it allowed us to have a much more comprehensive understanding of how to do things accessibly, because I had individuals that I could work with that started paying attention to ASL interpretation, making sure that we had descriptive text for images, making sure that we had audio description for video that didn't have voice and narrative. All of these kinds of things, still a work in progress, but they started coalescing into a picture of how we could do accessibility better. And that has created an opportunity for partnerships and dialogues that have moved across the organization in ways that wouldn't have happened if we were waiting for some sort of top-down, please do this approach. So as we moved a little further forward, knowing that we had these different nodes in the organization that had the ability to influence accessibility and had individuals that care about accessibility, we started working on then educating within our various spheres of influence. So for me, it was the designers. We've worked very hard to educate the designers not only on how to pick good colors and type, but how to think about information architecture, how to think about interaction design. We've been working with our engineers and starting to have much broader conversations about measuring accessibility and baking those things into the products that we're creating. Again, still kind of early days on our journey, but we're making progress. And it's through this advocacy and educating where we've got opportunities to put down a few more roots, to send out a few more of those shoots, that we're making progress. One of the great things that happened in this is we met a person, in fact, a couple of people that have the position in the organization, back to hierarchy, to start having conversations with upper leadership and start raising awareness about the value that being accessibility minded provides to the organization, about things that we can do. We were able to fund getting some proper tools, if you will. And that's where my relationship with DQ began, was having an accessibility analysis of our organization and being able to get access to Axe Monitor that helped us be much more comprehensive in our approach to monitoring the products that we're creating. But it took finding the right people to have the right conversations to be able to move from individual contributors trying to do things to starting to be systematic in our approach. So, a little bit about network effects then. I don't think there's anything particularly special about being a UX designer and creating an accessibility-minded organization. But I do have the ability to influence a few things, as we've mentioned. Look and feel. Decisions about typography, decisions about color, decisions about content arrangements, decisions about workflows are all within the purview of UX design. In looking at those things and approaching them with a who is my user and what kinds of challenges might an individual have when using these technologies has changed some of our approach, to the point now that last year with our design system team, their top priority was to move everything to being able to be WCAG 2.2 compliant, and that our engineers that support our design system are in the process of making those kinds of enhancements as well. We're working on being proactive rather than reactive. Now, I don't control all the content. I don't control a lot of things. But over the past years, we've built the relationships with other teams that do have influence to the point that we're being able to make more progress more consistently. So, as a UX designer, as a UX practice, one of the things that is true in every place that I've worked is that there is a need for good, strong relationships in order to have good quality be the output. A product is only as good as the code. It's only as good as the design. It's only as good as the content. It's only as good as the understanding of the audiences that it's designed to serve. UX design sits at a nice center point in learning about and executing on all of those things. So for me, I feel like UX is a perfect place to start conversations about accessibility, but it doesn't have to be the only place. And frankly, it might not be the best place, but because it was where I sit, it's where I chose to work from. So, advice for UX teams that want to try to move the accessibility of their organization and the products that they support forward. Make an audit of the things that you work on and the things that you have control over, and then find ways to make enhancements through small changes that can take place over time to the products that you're designing. My experience has been any time you walk in and say, I need you to change this now, is met with a high degree of resistance. But if we slide things in, then we're able to affect change without impacting timelines, costs, at least not very much. So as an example, going back several years ago, when we first started monitoring our products, Axe Monitor would tell me that we had a score of 7%, 8%. It was a great starting point. Loads of opportunity for improvement. Today, when we look across our systems, we're in the 30 and 40% range. Still loads of opportunity for improvement, but we can say that we've been making progress. And to be able to measure that progress and be able to identify products that are starting to make real progress and development is something we can take back to our organization and say, here are successes, and here's how it's impacting people. Look for allies. This is something that you just don't do alone as any one person or team. You're going to need to find allies. And in the case of our journey, that meant reaching out to engineers, reaching out to content creators, reaching out to policy leaders within the organization to help to affect change. For other teams, I would say reach out to your UX designers and talk with them about things that they can do that can help to enhance accessibility. Look for allies anywhere you can in your organization, and then start looking for those small, simple things that you can change that can start a trend towards being more thoughtful and intentional about accessibility. And then ultimately, preach to every person you can. Advocate, advocate, advocate. You'll find partners in the cause, and you'll find ways to affect change that may not necessarily be formally supported, but will be able to be acceptable in how you do your work. So, takeaways. First and foremost, be patient. What I've shared with you in 15, 20 minutes has been a 5-year journey so far. And I expect that it'll take another 5 years for us to get to where, as an organization, it's part of how we think and do work, rather than something that has to be encouraged and reminded. Look for the small, easy wins. It was easy for me to introduce changes related to color contrast and type size. And it didn't take a lot of effort to get that woven into everything that we're producing. Look for partnerships. Can't stress enough the importance of those networks. Theorize them. Shoot out your little feelers. Put down roots wherever you can, and then start shooting up, places of growth and excellence that, as it relates to accessibility. And then whenever you can, demonstrate those values. Demonstrate that it didn't have to be costly. Demonstrate that it wasn't necessarily hard. Demonstrate that it has an impact. When you make those demonstrations, it's easier to get someone on board and support you with your next ask that sometimes might be a little harder, a little more complicated, maybe even a little more costly. But if you've got your roots in, then it's easy to kind of get stuck and start helping to grow. So with that, I'd be open to some questions, some discussion to see what others' experiences are like, and if I can elaborate on anything that I've shared so far.
Ray, let me start by saying this was amazing. We have a great discussion in the chat. Folks really want to learn more. And one thing that was clear from the folks that were able to attend today's chat is that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is very fortunate to have you and your team passionate and working towards creating an accessible experience. To that end, folks want you to give a little bit of advice. So
Okay.
I'll put these questions together because I feel like they go along the same vein. One says, great journey. We're on a similar path in our organization, also starting from UX. Can you say more about how systemic is your approach now? And the second one says, could you share some examples of content arrangements you changed or how your approach to that evolved?
Okay. So how systemic? Let me start with that one. And a little bit of more of the backstory. Going back, I'm going to guess it's been 6, maybe 7 years now. When I talk about silos of excellence, we had excellent designers designing individual products without consideration for how those relate to other adjacent products or the organization as a whole. We were all over the map in terms of look and feel, identity, brand. So we did get some very top-down, very senior, fix this kind of direction. And so we worked on bringing all of our design practice together and then building this design system that was a representation of how we want our church digital technologies and content and print to be aligned. And so the design system was built in response to this desire to bring unity to the various products, services, and content that we produce. So I was brought on to be a manager in that process of bringing design together and systematizing our approach to design. So it, for me, was a perfect opportunity to then say, okay, let's prioritize accessibility. We have 4 basic pillars that drive our design system. First and foremost is we need to be effective in delivering product. Next, we wanted to make sure that we were being inclusive and thinking about the broadest audience possible. Now, we crafted those design principles before I would say we formally started our accessibility journey. But it gave us that guiding principle to say, we need to be mindful of who uses our products and be inclusive in the way that we think about our design. And accessibility was a logical extension there. And so we started to systematize things like typography, like color choice, like how we communicate state of system, how we prefer to move through processes, starting to just ask questions like, are there keyboard traps? Can a person who relies only on a keyboard accomplish the task that this is designed to do? And we got really disappointed when we'd start discovering that that wasn't always the case. So we work on fixing those things. So that's been our kind of, again, roots, rhizome. We're creeping out into the network of products and putting down our roots and trying to shape how we think about things. Roger, help me out. The second part of your question.
Yeah, it was about content arrangements. So now you've figured out this work, you've put together a blueprint for everyone, but in terms of the content that actually goes out, how did you strategize on that?
So this has been one of the, I would say, more current challenges because, again, as I referred to our organization, we have silos of excellence, and we've got these excellent content creators that are just far enough removed from our interface and system designers that getting good connection there is still hard. But we've started having many, many more conversations about, gosh, we shouldn't be putting text over images, or we need to be more intentional about the type of image that we superimpose text on. We've been able to be successful in having conversations where it's like, thou shalt not put text in an image. Superimposing, not that I love it, but still part of our look and feel. But we're starting to now have, I think, more discussions around, is the content being presented at a level that would be appropriate for individuals that have cognitive challenges? Are we presenting our content in a way that is more culturally informed, globally informed? And so we're starting to have many more conversations there that accessibility can start to be part of. And I don't know that I'm going to be answering that question as well as the individual would probably hope. But for me, this is one of these areas that is ripe for more improvement, and is going to be one of the things that is going to require much deeper collaboration between the designers that create an environment for content to be shared and those that are creating the content. And I really look forward to more of those discussions.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, we look at this tree, it's a big tree with lots of branches and folks doing separate things, but we need to remember that it all comes back to the root. So the important thing here is that we have a key sound methodology. We're all singing from the same sheet music, and there's a clear blueprint that we're following. I think one of
Yeah.
the takeaways that you mentioned at the start is patience. This takes time, right? You
Yeah.
boiled it down to about a 20-minute conversation, but this took you about 5 years to achieve. So one of the things that
Yeah.
I would chat about with my clients is let's keep things realistic. Like you said, let's enjoy those small wins, and we're building up towards an awesome,
Yeah.
accessible program, and it's a journey.
Yeah. So, Roger, one of the things I would add to that, though, is when we look at the, tree versus grass metaphors, we're still not in a place where centrally there is a thou shalt do this. Okay. We're still affecting change through that grassroots network of relationships. Where can we sneak this in rather than I'm accountable for delivering this? And we're, I think, on the cusp. I actually expect that this year we'll probably start seeing a shift towards teams being accountable for delivering accessibility rather than we trying to squeeze it in where we can. And I'm excited about the moment that we're at as an organization. And maybe next year I can come back and talk about what's happened during 2024 on this journey.
You have to. You have to. So definitely keep up with Ray on his social media. I have him on LinkedIn. I'm seeing he's pretty active. Keep us updated as this program grows, and definitely come back to AxeCon because we need updates as things advance. All
Okay,
right, I'll ask you another question.
please.
So we had this asked twice. What advice would you give to, say, a fledgling UX designer? They're new to the role, they're passionate about doing it right from the get-go. What would you say to this person?
Great question. Love that question, in fact. So I'm going to go to UX 101. And this is kind of like Dr. Ray putting on his, I teach UX design at some of the universities. And I always start, and it's the classic: who's your user? What do they need? And then how can you help them accomplish that? So, as a new UX designer, I would invite you to start with that fundamental. I'm sure you've already heard it: know your user. But in this case, now expand your understanding of who is your user to who is my user and what are the challenges that they might be experiencing when it comes to being able to use the service that I'm providing. And then ask yourself that question from the perspective of all of these kinds of different disabilities that as designers, we're in a position to either make life better or make life more challenging. And I would say, as a young designer, be understanding of the nature of the position you are in. You have the ability to impact people's experiences, impact people's lives, and that if you can be mindful that the decisions that you're making have consequence, and then seek to design in a way that enables and lifts rather than returns on an investment or makes a company money, that you are going to be able to alter the way you approach design. We still have to pay bills. We still have, those goals that companies are hiring you to help make impact on. But broaden your perspective, open your vision to more than just my user that's on that persona that looks and behaves an awful lot like maybe yourself rather than others that we should be being mindful of.
Got it. Okay. That's awesome. That's awesome advice. Okay. Now, putting a bit of a spin on this question that I'm reading,
Please.
how did you get yourself into this mess? I know you're passionate about this, but it certainly didn't seem easy. And I'm looking through this chat, and there's lots of people that are facing rejections. They're trying to get
Mhm.
engineering teams into this process that won't listen. So, how did you deal with rejection? And how did you deal with unresponsiveness in the industry or across these other branches?
Yeah. So let me go back to a comment that I had made, which is in almost no situation have I been in a meeting where anyone has said, we should not be doing accessibility. Okay. There have been a couple of those. They've been really frustrating to me. But the conversation has typically been, I'm not being held accountable for that, or that's hard, or fill in any other excuse that you would like. So the approach that I've taken is when it's something that UX design has a stewardship over, that I basically write it into the requirements that the engineers need to work on. And so it's like, this is a requirement. It may not be a functional requirement. This might be a non-functional, but it is still a requirement for the product. And so for us to be successful, we need to deliver this particular way. And again, look for the small wins. Don't go in asking for something huge, and if you found somebody, shout out to Matt, my engineer colleague who helps me so much on this. Find somebody who can be an engineer's perspective on what you're asking and ask them, is it hard? Because again, on this language declaration thing, I would have thought changing from a 3-character code to a 2-character code would not be hard. And I was shocked at the complexity that one decision made years ago has on our current systems. So find out about the hidden complexities and then find out, what you can do about those. But it's one of those where I would say, try to put on the hat of the person that you're working with. Ask the question, how hard is this? Is this a reasonable conversation to be having? And if not, why? Because it might help you better understand how to approach the conversation or a different avenue to pursue rather than the one that you're currently engaged in.
Wow. Okay. So putting yourself in someone else's shoes, it sounds like it's important that I consider not only the audience for who I'm creating this for, but also who is creating this in the first place. And it sounds like you're saying if the institution doesn't have a policy, right? I can still create my own project policy. Whereas part of this project, I have some requirements. And one of the requirements is that you do need to deliver this in an accessible manner, but also how can I help you do that? How can we help you do that?
Yeah, exactly that. And, I have to acknowledge as a manager of a UX team, I do have a little bit of that authority and power stuff. Okay. But when I started this journey, I didn't. And so it was, all right, what can I do? And so as an individual contributor, I was designing with this idea of what, am I meeting contrast standards? Are my targets large enough? Those kinds of things were put into the design, and those were the requirements of the design. Now, when we start getting into things that are code, like good ARIA labels, good keyboard accessibility, or content, if you're not in control of that, you might be receiving things that are really not great from an accessibility perspective. At that point, it's like, hey, I have a question. Is it possible that we could change this? Here's why. And I think the important thing here is explain the why. Because if you're just going in with the designer said it has to be different, that doesn't necessarily go as far or as well as, I have this question. I need to understand. I want you to understand why this is a question. And then I want to understand if this is something that we can address. Can we come together on this? Not, I want to push you to doing it the way I tell you to do it. UX design is all about soft skills at the end of the day. And if you can master those conversations, I think you'll be able to see success.
That's powerful. So it's not even just about what you say, but it's also the how you say it and how you deliver this message as well.
Yeah.
Okay. And Ray, for you and also for everyone in the chat, just doing a quick time check. We have about 10 minutes. Please keep those questions coming. I swear we're in a therapeutic session. Thank you so much, Ray. So I'll move on to the next one. So someone's asking about quantifying. They said, what are some methodologies your team has come up with to quantify accessibility and improvements to be able to show progress to the wider organization?
Great question. So quantifying accessibility, I think, like quantifying usability, is both challenging. And I got to say, be careful what you measure, because once you start measuring something, that becomes the target. And if you're not measuring intentionally, you might be making change in places that aren't providing value. So, with that as background, some of the things that we've been doing, first and foremost, again, shout out to DQ and Axe Monitor. That has been for me, fundamental in being able to say, this is where we're at and this is where we're going, and being able to identify product teams and error types that we can start to have conversations around. So whether you're using a free tool, so let's take DevTools as an example, and just looking at the criticals that are on a page, critical errors that are on a page, and then being able to say, okay, for my product, I've been successful at removing X% of the critical errors, and then report on that. That is, it's the simple, inexpensive way. The time is the thing that is the cost. And as long as you can kind of weave that into what you're doing, without delaying delivery and all of those other things that we're accountable for, you can start to say, hey, look, we removed these errors and we still met deadlines. We didn't run over budget, and we're still making changes that are positive on an accessibility front. The other thing is, a lot of the classics of UX, like call center, like what are the calls like in the call center, and has a change that we made reduced the time spent on a particular type of a call? Those are kinds of measures and analytics that product managers are going to want to know about. And so, again, ask the questions, find out who's keeping track of different things, and where you can start keeping track of things that you have influence over.
Okay. Before I ask you this question, quick little background check. Ray, would you say that you're comfortable speaking on usability?
Yes.
Someone wants to know, my current workplace accepts and prioritizes accessibility, but not so much usability. How would you go about making usability as important as accessibility? And how is your process in making sure both were addressed throughout the journey?
Interesting. Interesting challenge. So, usability can be a broad area. So if I'm not honing in on the right aspect of usability, I'll say, like, ping me. You've got my email address on the screen. Shoot me an email. But let's look at it from this perspective. I think if you create something that is accessible, the usability of that thing goes up. And if you have thought through from a universal design kind of a perspective, where we're trying to make this good for everybody universally, the usability in theory should be improving as you're working on accessibility. But then there are those other aspects of usability. And so if we want to take some older kind of HCI, human computer interaction, things like time to task and error rates, those are measures, things that can be quantified, and things that can be worked on. And if you can say, okay, I'm improving the usefulness and usability because I can do something in 2 steps instead of 7, or we have more people that are successfully completing task A than we did before, you are improving now the usability. And if accessibility is being tucked in with that, fabulous. So, how do you have an organization start to embrace usability? I would say it goes back to who's my user, what are they trying to accomplish, how can I help them accomplish it in a more effective and accessible and inclusive and enjoyable way. And if you start asking those questions and then having that help drive your design, the usability will go up, and accessibility might be the springboard to those other conversations. I'd love to be in a real-time dialogue with this person, because that's a fascinating flip on what my experience is.
Yeah. And the person's name is Oscar. Oscar, that's an awesome question. And the reason
Yeah.
I thought it was important to ask is because I think of design as shift left. Shift left is a
Mm-hmm.
terminology your DQ where you're addressing accessibility as early as possible. But usability, now we've gone through the development, now we've gone through the production, it's out there in the wild, someone's using it. So piggybacking on what Ray said, I think it's worth an experiment. That end user, whoever you put this together with in mind, let's have these folks utilize this platform. Let's monitor this. Let's get their responses. Let's create some incentives where they will actually feel like their time is valuable and their responses will be heard. And let's confirm. Let's make sure we didn't simply just check off a box on the accessibility, but instead we created an awesome end user experience where folks enjoy utilizing our platform and get maximum value from it. Awesome
Yeah.
response, Ray. Oscar, we'd love to continue the discussion on that point. Please let us know if you have more.
Yeah.
In terms of a time check, we have about 3 minutes. So it's like enough time for about one more question. I'm looking through. See how we'll end today's session. Ray, what are the most challenging and expensive accessibility improvements, especially when it conflicts with business and timelines?
Oh, so I hate to go to UX answer number one, but it depends. And it's going to depend upon your landscape, your product environment. Um, for me, I think one of the most expensive things that we have addressed and continue to work on addressing is navigation. And a lot of that comes down to more UX, usability kinds of discussions around information architecture. But then we get into interaction design, and interaction design clearly connects into accessibility. But that topic, navigation, for me, has been a multi-year journey to try and make enhancements to and improvements to. If any of the team that I work with that works on that is on the call today, gosh, thanks, guys. In a genuine, we're making progress. Thank you for engaging in the conversations. There for a long time, it was just like, no. I had, a team that was just like, no, we'll tell you how it's supposed to be. And I was like, but the user experience, but the accessibility. We've made improvements in those relationships and understanding, and now we're making progress. But in the case of our organization, that's been years, countless hours. And we're still not done.
Well, shout out to the navigation team. Thank you for being open and responsive to feedback and helping Ray create an awesome end user experience. And we're wrapping up the show. Thank you, Raydal, for an awesome session. A friendly reminder, folks, you can continue the conversation in our community Discord